which has been struck by disasters lately, as you know. This evening, we're extremely honored to have Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei visiting, a Nobel laureate from 2005 for the agency that he headed at the UN. On the way in, we had a little bit of a game going down in the lifts as he was coming up, but we sorted that out. And we had a look at the pictures on the wall, which have a surprisingly large number of Nobel Peace Laureates who have visited the Foreign Correspondents Club over the years, including 7 who came in 1973 to try and get Aung San Suu Kyi, the 1991 Peace Laureate, liberated. Anyway, on that, I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to invite Uwe Morawetz of Bridges to come and give you a rundown on what it's all about.
Yeah, welcome this evening and to the 5th ASEAN event series, Bridges, Dialogues Towards a Culture of Peace. Bridges is facilitated by the International Peace Foundation, a non-political and non-religious foundation, under the common patronage of 21 Nobel Peace Prize laureates based in Vienna. The events are hosted in cooperation with various local partners, including some of the country's major universities. Having started in September last year, Bridges is now being continuously held in Thailand and Singapore until March, involving the participation of Nobel laureates from various fields. The 5th ASEAN series of Bridges follows the series of 500 Bridges events, which the International Peace Foundation has already hosted in Thailand, the Philippines, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Vietnam since 2003, as an independent contribution to the Decade for a Culture of Peace and Nonviolence. Increased ethnic, political, religious, and social conflicts and the helplessness to respond to them without further stimulating the spiral of violence show us peace is not a given good. It has to be constantly learned, experienced, and created anew. Peace is not a passive state. Peace is a process which needs time, attention, and the participation of all of us. And peace begins with education. The seeds of peace need to be planted in schools and universities in the new generation. This is why the International Peace Foundation cooperates with major schools and universities, as well as with UNESCO, in realizing this Bridges program. We believe in the importance of the education and scientific community of Thailand by bringing the knowledge and wisdom of Nobel laureates for economics, peace, physics, chemistry, medicine, to this country. What these highly in-demand Nobel laureates normally see of a country are airports and hotels. They deliver their lecture, stay for one night, and leave. In the case of Bridges, we have invited them here to not only speak, but to share, to engage, to listen. And they come here not for one day or one event only, but they stay, some of them, for up to 2 weeks, for various dialogues and events, because of their real interest in building bridges, because of their real interest in Thailand. It is our hope that these are not first and final visits of these Nobel laureates, but visits with many fruitful returns, to build long-lasting friendship and to start, for instance, research programs or other forms of cooperation with the local universities and schools. This is how Bridges develops into a long-term and sustainable success for Thailand to strengthen education as a basis for peace. I thank the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand and the organizing committee of today's event for taking up this opportunity of our cooperation and for inviting today the Nobel Peace Laureate, Dr. Mohamed ElBaradei, to this forum. We look forward to interacting with him tonight and to his important contribution to build bridges. Welcome, Dr. ElBaradei.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you here today. And again, as mentioned, the idea was to have sort of a dialogue on peace. And I think we all agree that we are far removed from what we can call a peaceful world right now. I will touch on a number of issues which I think are haunting us, and that are drivers to insecurity. And the first, of course, is what we see as an increasing inequity everywhere. The obscene inequality, in fact. I'm sure all of you have the numbers, so I don't need to go around some of the numbers you see. But when you have, half 2.8 billion people, in fact, continue to live under $2 a day. I mean, that doesn't augur well for a peaceful world, because poverty is not just not poverty. It just comes with it a lot of marginalization, anger, injustice, humiliation, and what have you. The inequality also comes in not just in poverty. I mean, it's lack of access to education, lack of access to health care. Last year, 1.7 million people died in Africa, for example, out of HIV/AIDS because they have no access to antiretroviral medication, which I guess now is something like $10 a month or so, On the other side of the fence, then you get 80 people, and as somebody mentioned, you can put them in one bus, who owns as much as 3.5 billion people, It is obscene to me. I mean, I don't know what other word you can have, and that is a phenomenon that's going not just globally, but even within countries. You have seen probably the US statistics that the top 1% now owns as much as the rest of the 99% of the Americans. Well, that says something that the system of democracy, as we talked about it, maybe need to have some adjustment, some recalibration. I don't know what it is, but I don't think you would feel that this is the democracy we're looking for. If we end up having such huge gap between the rich and the poor, and the middle class in many countries are shrinking. The working class or the poor people are, expanding. And as I think the French economist Piketty mentioned, that this is not going to adjust by itself, And it's a phenomenon that is going to continue unless we do some drastic change. I'm not an economist, but I think he's suggesting a global tax, for example, or to adjust the system. What worries me, of course, that this is one. What worries me that in many of these cases, when you have poverty, it is accompanied by lack of good governance. And usually in its lack of good governance leads again to the same marginalization, civil strife, civil wars, ethnic wars. I mean, when you have a lack of good governance, in many ways, as we have seen it now, and that's probably the other issue, people lose their identity with the state, and then they start to identify with tribes, with ethnic, origins, with, religion, whatever other source of identity they can have. Basically, we need, I guess, in some way, identity. And when you lose identity with the state, you go to a different identity. But once you start fragmenting, then that's where the problem starts. And oppression and poverty is lethal combination. And I think, we've seen some of the extremism right now, and we are all obviously shocked and horrified by the brutality of some of the activities. But I would suggest that, again, other than just saying that we need to use force and how much, airstrike, that we need to see why we have this environment that create that kind of extremism, terrorism, whatever you want to call it. We have also, again, it's very odd that in many ways we have become very connected. I think if you look at how we interact, how we communicate, how we travel, how we receive information, we're becoming a one global community. But so everybody knows what's happening everywhere else. But on the other hand, we are fragmenting in many ways, and we're developing this sense of otherness in many ways. That is, if it doesn't happen in my backyard, then it's not really my problem. But it is our problem, because as we have seen in many recent incidents, that no part of the world is quarantined, and whatever insecurity anywhere is becoming insecurity everywhere, But we don't act in that fashion, We have also international institutions, and that's the UN system, which is pretty much dysfunctional right now. I mean, it has been developed at the end of the Second Cold War in 1940s, and the world has changed so much. Power structure has changed so much, issues, priorities, and we haven't adjusted the system. And as a result, that we have most of the problems, global challenges we are facing, climate change, arms control, communicable diseases, poverty alleviation, we are not able to address it because the institutions do not have the resources or the authority. And government continue business as usual, a very myopic attitude, although as they should have learned by now that no one country is able to resolve any of these issues on its own, no much how powerful it is, they keep talking about, there's a lot of talk yet how connected we have become, that we need a reform of the institution. But if you look at actual actions, nothing is really happening. Then what's worse, that we still continue to rely on our global security on nuclear weapons, that with the fantastic advances we have made in humanity, in biology, nuclear physics, communication, we're still in our security relying on who has the biggest club, essentially, and we still rely on violence as a primary means to settle our disputes. I mentioned poverty, and it is not that we don't have the money. Last year we spent $1.7 trillion on armament. That is, and as I mentioned by a couple of colleagues who used to work in the World Food Program, heading the World Food Program, if they will get just 1% of that money, the 900 billion people who go to bed hungry every night will have enough to eat, and that's just 1%. So nobody can question it. It's not a matter of money. It's a matter of how we have our priority structured. With all the wars around, for example, the peacekeeping operation, global peacekeeping operation, we spent something like 0.5% on it, of what we spent on armament. I saw a couple of weeks ago the head of the UNHCR, the refugee agency, almost begging for $8 billion, just to feed the millions of refugees that continue to live in squalor. And he said that he's only getting half of that. That's $4 billion. The $8 billion, as I said, if you compare it to the $1.7 trillion, is less than, it's around maybe 0.5%, but he's not getting that money. And you keep asking yourself these questions. Why are we acting in such a way, and it is not. It's not just an ethical questions, It's, as I said, it's becoming more and more a question of survival. That's if we continue to develop along us versus them, or the others, or if they are not part of my neighborhood, I don't really care about them, Pretty much, with the kind of nuclear weapons we have, chemical weapon, biological. I should mention that we still continue to have 16,000 nuclear warheads, and that's 25 years after the end of the Cold War, and 2,000 of them are on high status alert. Still, that takes probably, it used to be half an hour, to react to a reported launch of a nuclear weapon. I was told it has been adjusted a bit, but still, it's still quite, the warning period is still very dangerously short. And this could be, of course, a computer error, could be unauthorized, could be any one of these reasons that might lead us to get into a nuclear holocaust. So these are issues that, big picture issues actually. They're not difficult to understand to my mind, and yet we're not acting on it. All we act on is the symptoms. As I said, let us see what Charlie Hebdo, let us see Boko Haram, let us see ISIL. Yeah, these are going to continue, and to my mind, and increase as long as you continue to have this environment. And unless you change the environment, unless you make sure that you create the environment that lead us to act as decent human beings, you will continue to get more of the same. Yeah. If people feel that they are not treated as human beings, for whatever reason, we should not be surprised that they are not acting as human beings. I mean, that is simple, I think, at that. I mean, the human nature is very highly complex. I mean, of course, it's, I don't know whether it's yin and yang or whatever, but it's, sometimes you see the best of us, sometimes you see the worst of us, and it's not, of course, an easy issue, but it's an issue I think has to do with the environment you live in. If you are provided with basic human needs, if you are having your sense of dignity, and I think that's a key. When we talk about democracy and we really need to. I get it boiled down to dignity. Dignity means I have the right to speak, freedom of expression, freedom of belief. But also the basic needs, economic needs. And any system that does not ensure the dignity of every human being is not necessarily the optimal system. I'm not sure that we have an optimal system, but I think we should, our test case should always be: are we providing dignity to the people, and are we acting on the basis of human solidarity, as we by now should have understood that irrespective of all the color and race and religion and what have you, we're still at the end of the day one family, and we need to support each other. But are we acting on that basis, or we are acting on geopolitical interests, very, myopic geopolitical interests? I suggest again the answer is the latter. If you look at some of the wars, for example, if you look at Rwanda, if you look at Darfur, if you look even, people did not, or Congo, in the Congo in last decade, 5 million people died. I'm sure maybe some of you don't even know that if you're not following the African situation. Certainly most of the people don't, and it doesn't get covered anywhere. In the newspaper, I bet that you would not get much about Congo. Maybe a paragraph in page 13 or somewhere. But these are because they were not looked at as of geopolitical interest. Everybody was wringing their hands. I mean, again, I go back to the International Community Security Council. Nothing was done But you compare that, for example, with Afghanistan, because people saw that this is, of geopolitical importance, and then of course NATO was ready to go, and all the wherewithal was sent there, and in some other situation, despite again the importance of the situation, like in Syria, for example, everybody is there, but nobody is there for the people whom we really need to save, and the civilians. There's 200,000 Syrians who died in the last 3 years. There's 3 million refugees outside of the country. I think 4 or 5 million internally disposed. And again, everybody talks. If you read in the paper, everybody talks about the Syrian situation, the tragic humanitarian situation, but nobody is acting on it. And nobody, although everybody is there financing foreign fighters, talking about moderate resistance, and of course it ended up that the extremists got the upper hand in Syria, and now nobody knows what to do with Syria, because these are situations that are heart-wrenching, because at the end the ones who are paying the price are the innocent civilian. It could be any one of us, had they been in that sort of situation. Iraq, again, if you look at Iraq, again, and what do you do in this sort of situation? And there's no easy answer. If you have a dictator like Saddam Hussein, who was a horrible dictator, but the result of the war 10 years after the war, or 12 years after the war, it's a country that is completely fragmented. It's along ethnic, and not only that, the way it was managed, the way that the army was disbanded, you now see a good part of that disgruntled army as part of the ISIL, And we are now asking, why do we have ISIL? Why are ISIL sophisticated? Well, the answer goes back, when you decided to disband the whole army of Iraq. So we are, I think we are in many ways mismanaging many of the issues both at the national level, at the international level. And we keep doing the same thing, and somehow expect, contrary to Einstein, different results. We're not going to get different results unless we change our mindset, unless we understand. And what's really frustrating, that these issues I'm talking about, it's doable to change all that. A lot of it is just socioeconomic. A lot of these issues are socioeconomic. It's a development issue. It's an education issue. But we're not putting the money. Where is our mouth is. Why do we continue to believe that we continue to rely on nuclear weapon and be surprised that other countries will eventually go and get them? How you could have a system that's sustainable, that is based on some are more equal than others? It doesn't work. You could hold the center of that system for a number of years, but if you look long term, it's not going to work. But we haven't, everybody, for example, if I take nuclear, that's an area where I work on. Everybody who is anybody in that field, including people like Henry Kissinger, Bill Perry, George Shultz, Sam Nunn, all of these guys now are saying we need to get rid of nuclear weapons because they are more increasingly hazardous and decreasingly effective. That's their words. And because they are afraid that if, that through accidentals, we might have a launch of nuclear weapon, or God forbid that some of these extremist groups get their hands on a nuclear weapon, or even a powerful radioactive source. They have no return address, and deterrence for them has no meaning. They are ready to die anyway. So these are issues. I think I try to continue to talk about it, that whether we will be able to, or at least make people aware of it. Whether we will be able to change things in the short term, it depends. I mean, if you look right now at, for example, the Iranian negotiation, I mean, the Iranian deal, I mean, this deal could have been had 10 years ago, even a better deal, had we accepted the fact that we sit together and negotiate. But for a number of years, for 4 or 5 years, I think, the U.S. completely refused to even sit with Iran on the negotiating table. Now they are sitting after, and of course things could have been much easier, 10 years ago. So conflict does not improve when you leave them festering. If you look at some of the issues, like the Palestinian issue, for example, it has been going on for over 60 years, I believe, since, is it getting any better? Is Israel more secure? Is the Palestinian more satisfied? And yet we keep, again, as I said, touching, around the edges. We don't really address the major problems. So these are, again, as I said, some of the issues, and I deal with, I talk on, and I'll be pleased to, if you have any questions, or comments on some of these issues. Thank you.
Okay, as usual, we have a microphone in the middle of the room, so if you want to ask a question, come forward, identify yourself, and pose it. Whilst that's going on, I'll kick off. Southeast Asia is an area of relative peace. It's emerging peace. We have things calming down in Mindanao. Aceh has gone off the boil. We have pockets of serious problems, such as the south of Thailand. We still have serious problems in Burma, Myanmar. This is a country this is a region that is prospering. It's doing very well financially, and it contrasts very much with what you've been describing. If you go look at the problem globally of peace, where do you see the real flashpoints? You're talking about nuclear weapons, which is something most of us would be horrified occurring. Does that make somewhere like Ukraine a more serious threat to world peace than somewhere like Syria, where you're seeing this barbarism emerging and very, very primitive forms of violence and non-peaceful activities?
No, I think, again, as you mentioned, Southeast Asia is doing well, but again, you still have pockets of problems. I don't know, again, how much in terms of equity, in terms of equality is being developed in this region, but that's I do not know. But some other region which is doing pretty well, again, is Latin America, for example. I think the region which is really in the pits right now in the Middle East, which is a region which is almost melting down in many ways, is coming out after many decades of repression, and again, people don't understand that sometimes, you cannot just move overnight, into building a pluralistic society. But yet that's what my worry in not only in the Middle East, but Ukraine you mentioned, for example. I was in Kiev a couple of months ago. Again, it's the challenge I think we are facing in many ways is how to ensure that people are ready to accept a pluralistic, cohesive society, that minorities are being protected. I mean, that is Ukraine. I'm not sure anybody is in the right mind will think of using any nuclear or even use, but the fact that you have a war in Europe right now, again, I mean, I look at the fact that you have a war in Europe and the fact that you have ISIL that's controlling a piece of land as large as Switzerland, to be two very, ominous, writing on the wall. This is not so. Sure, I mean, in some areas as you said, we are making progress. I mean, Latin America right now, I think, with the exception probably of Cuba to a certain extent, they go through, more or less democratic, processes, and even Cuba is hopefully is opening up again. So. In this area, again, you see some movement, but we still have, I think, 1/3 1/3 of the world population lives under authoritarian system. I mean, that's still a big chunk, and with all the problem that comes with that. And we still, as I said, Africa, for example, we still have a lot of problem of governance, a lot of problem of poverty, and so the issue actually is, I continue to say, are we doing enough to help those who are in need? And I'm not talking about states per se, but people. Are we doing enough to, ensure that people get education, get health care, get training on governance? That is, you need, as something I clearly understand, unless you have a very thriving civil society, you're not going to go very far. I mean, civil society is a vehicle for any change, political change, economic change. And of course, in all this authoritarian system, civil society is the first thing you try to crush.
Right. Question?
Thank you. Michael Craven, Thammasat University. Sir, could you talk a little bit about your impressions on Indonesia, how they've succeeded in reversing the Gini coefficient, the index, and what that means for democracy?
I frankly don't know much about that. I mean, I'm not following closely the Indonesian situation. But Indonesia, as I mentioned again, is a one country where it, in some way, it's a model, because the number of, India and Indonesia are some models with the number of ethnicity and language difference, and they manage to move into, a pluralistic, cohesive society. I know Indonesia is doing well economically, but I don't know, unfortunately, the details of how they did it.
Michael Mackey, freelance. Just a quick question. You mentioned the role of the UN and the international institutions. I have to agree with you. They've always been lopsided. They've always favoured the Americans and Western interests in various guises. Are these institutions actually capable of reform? And how can they be reformed to represent the world more fairly?
Well, I think they will be reformed if the member states agree to reform them, and the ones who are privileged today agree to reform them. You said they have been many ways dominated by major power, the US, but is the US really getting, functioning institutions? I think, even the US, to my mind, would be profiting or beneficiary from fixing the institution, adjusting the institution. I mean, if you have now, for example, a Security Council does not have India, as part of the decision-making process, which is 1/6 of the world population. How does that work? If you still have Security Council completely hamstrung by the veto power, just right, left, and center, how that you've got to get the member state to get convinced that they need to reform the system, and they need to understand that they need to make some compromises, and that power is not a zero-sum game. They need to understand that they have to share power, so to speak, whatever your definition of power. You have to share power. And that is not, 10 years ago, there have been a lot of talks about the UN reform, Security Council reform, and that ended up in going nowhere. And it's not just the UN, but you talk about the WHO, you talk about the International Atomic Energy Agency, you talk about any UN system. The authority these institutions have to deal with these global issues are very limited, and the resources is even worse, because the resources, they have to, they are living on, a shoe-tight budget, so it is not going, the people, what you talk about the these institutions are made of the member state, and you have got to get the member state to understand and agree that the current system, the current institution are not serving them well, because they are not able to fix any of the problem we are facing. You can give me any of the problem we are facing: terrorism, climate change, arms control. Well, we're not moving on any of these issues, and all these issues are haunting everybody. It is not just the US or the big powers.
Do you actually think that the UN, given this permanent state of stasis that seems to be evolving within the institutions, is actually capable of reform from within? That these people don't concede power unless pushed. They don't believe it's yet in their interests to give it. And it might be in the interests of ascendant powers, mentioning no names, China, to keep that stasis.
Yeah, well, that's the role of civil society. You know, if you leave it to government, I agree with you that government will not, they work on certain logic that might not necessarily be in the public common good. But that's when you talk about civil society, you talk about the power of the people to tell the politician that this is not the kind of system we would like to have, because it's not serving us well, and we need to fix the system. Is that happening? I mean, we are all never really get involved, or the public never get involved in these issues, and continue to say we will wait for the government to do it. Well, the government I agree with you, are not going to do it on their own, because they think that, they are comfortable that way. But they are comfortable, but we are not comfortable. That's clearly, because the outcome is not great.
Sean Crispin. This is a press club, sir, so allow me to stir the pot a bit. You spoke a bit in your address about what you apparently perceive to be the failings of democracy, and that it's not able to result in more economic democracy, i.e. the problem of entrenched poverty the world over. But I'd be interested to hear you speak a bit philosophically about your personal experience, in that, as I understand it, you personally were involved in backing, if not one, then two military takeovers in your own country, one from an elected government. I wonder if you might speak to how you've personally reconciled your role as a man of peace, coming to a place like Thailand to offer a certain message of reconciliation, and your own personal history in a coup that turned out very bloody in 2013 and led to the incarceration of a number of people from the Muslim Brotherhood. Following on that, if you might, I wonder what message you might bring to the current Thai government about reconciliation and the role of military coups in achieving that.
Yeah, on the first question, I was not. Again, you probably have realized that there was an uprising in Egypt in 2011. We got an elected government. There was another uprising in 2013. The country, if you remember, was on the verge of a civil war at that time. The country was completely divided, polarized. I stepped in basically to avoid a civil war by calling for an early presidential election. And things did not go in that direction. Things got violent. The roadmap went into a way which I didn't think is the right way. And as you remember, I stepped out after 4 weeks. So it's not that I participated in that process. It was a different process I wanted to see, which is an early presidential election with an inclusive approach, including everybody. It was not meant at all. The roadmap was supposed to have everybody included. And I still believe the same. Either in Egypt, either any country, including Thailand. I mean, although I would not get into details here, but you have to find a formula by which you have an inclusive approach. And a polarized society is not going to go anywhere. And whether you are right, left, and center, particularly in emerging democracies, you need people, to make sure that you have a grand coalition, because you can't afford at the beginning of a nascent democracy to continue to have a competition that leads sometimes to exclusion of part of society. That doesn't work. So that's my answer. Yeah.
So would you provide your tacit backing for the military coup in Thailand, because there was a section of society that felt that it was being excluded?
No, I was not providing. I mean, don't get me into backing anything I do not back. And that's not what I said. I said that we need to, irrespective of the country, we need to have an inclusive approach anywhere if you have a healthy society to move forward. And a democracy, again, obviously I subscribe to democracy, but we have, there is no perfect model. And I'm saying that we continue, the human project continue to adjust as we go along. And I absolutely value every, all the values that come with democracy, economic rights, political rights, but you need to adjust sometimes. And as we have seen, there are different models. There are European models, the American model, parliamentary system, and presidential system. But then the point I think I was trying to say that these, in Europe, for example, it took 300 years to do that, and you have got to kill everybody and his brother before you realize that this is not the way to go, that we have to find a way to live together. And you have gone through a religious reformation, and you have gone through a renaissance. So I'm not saying that, basically I'm saying that to understand that, in many parts of the world, you still have to put things in context, that it takes time, because for democracy to function, you need institutions. It's not individuals. You need institutions. You need culture. And these cultures, if they have not been there for generations, you do not expect that it will happen in a couple of years. You will continue to get hiccups on the way. But in my view, once a process started, there's no going back. If you look at the Middle East right now, in Yemen, Syria, there's a horrible situation, but there is a process started. People are fighting for their dignity. And it might take, sometimes it might take even generation, but there is no going back, because again, I come back to how much we're connected we are, the social network right now. Everybody understands exactly what they want, how the grass looks on the other side. And so I think what we have to do is how to make sure that the process is an enhanced process, a faster process, and a less violent, basically, or hopefully a peaceful way,
Yeah, I think it's the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta this week, as it happens.
Yes. Joe Arden, just an individual FCCT member. It's been almost 2 decades, Doctor, since you assumed the role of Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and it's been a decade since you and the agency were awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace. Quoting from the Nobel Prize Committee, for your efforts to prevent nuclear energy from being used for military purposes and to ensure that nuclear energy for peaceful purposes is used in the safest possible way. Thinking back to the almost 2 decades since you assumed that role and the 1 decade since you were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, are you more or less optimistic with regard to the prevention of nuclear energy from being used for military purposes than you were 2 decades ago or 1 decade ago?
Well, I'm not sure I'm more optimistic. In fact, last month I gave the McNamara Memorial Lecture at Harvard, Kennedy School, and I said that the commitment that was made 44 years ago under the Non-Proliferation Treaty for the nuclear weapon state to divest themselves from nuclear weapon rings quite hollow today, and that I said that the commitment is not really, to me today, a genuine commitment, because as I mentioned, when you end up after 44 years after that commitment to have 16,000 warheads after the end of the Cold War, quarter of a century after the end of the Cold War, you cannot really say that this commitment has been made in good faith. You remember President Obama made this famous speech at Prague, when he committed the U.S. to move toward nuclear disarmament, and to the admiration and applause of everybody, he got the Nobel Prize, I think, even for that commitment, But look at where we are today. I think we are going in the reverse. In fact, all the weapon states are modernizing their nuclear weapons. I think the U.S. I was in Boston for a few months. I was following that closely. They're going to spend $1 trillion, on modernizing their nuclear weapons. How does that square with that commitment? So the answer, of course, I'm not optimistic. And my concern also, if you continue on that road, then you will invite other countries who are in areas of conflict, if they are squeezed, to try to go on the nuclear weapon route. That's also a worry, and that's a worry that John Kennedy, in the 60s, predicted that we might have 15 or 20 nuclear weapon states. Well, the more nuclear weapon states you have, the more the odds that they will be used. That's for a variety of reasons which I mentioned.
Hi. I know that many people have been waiting for...
Sorry, who are you?
My name is Danny Brown. I'm just right here. And many people have been waiting and expecting a strike on the Iranian nuclear program. And I'm just wondering, what is the state of their nuclear program? Is that ever going to happen? Or is the U.S. and Israel attacking Iran? And if ISIS has changed anything in the region, and so because of ISIS, there will never be an attack on Iran. And I'm also wondering if you expect the Assad government to fall anytime soon.
Well, I've always been my conviction on the record publicly, since I was at the agency, that the Iranian issue is not amenable by any way to a military solution. There is only one way to do it, which is negotiation. I mean, I think you'll be... it's during a period of time when there were some new crazy, and I still believe anybody who's calling for a military solution for the Iranian issue is a crazy, because you will get a much worse situation, than what you have. I mean, nobody today is vouching that Iran is developing nuclear weapon. I think even the U.S. intelligence, as you probably know, say that Iran stopped any research, nuclear weapon research, assuming that they have done that in 2003, and that still continues the assessment of the U.S. intelligence agencies, all the intelligence agencies. So there is no imminent threat that requires you to go and again, you can go into this issue is why some countries are keeping their weapons, as I mentioned, and telling everybody else you cannot even touch the knowledge of the nuclear technology. I mean, these are issues that is not just technical issues. These are issues that has to do with equity. And that's why I'm saying that the only way to resolve the Iranian issue is through dialogue, through negotiation. But part of it has to be a discussion of regional security in the Middle East, because you cannot separate security from any nuclear activities, peaceful or non-peaceful, in that region.
Question?
I'm Andrew Silver, retired un-American. I voted for Obama twice, and I don't think that any benefit has come from that. Can you think of any way that the world is better because of Obama's foreign policy, especially in terms of international agreements like that on climate change and also nuclear weapons? I think actually that he's not running the country, that it's the billionaires in the bus who own half the wealth of the country that are in charge.
I didn't understand the question.
Obama's rule, his presidency, can you think of any international agreements that have benefited from him? He's been elected twice. Nuclear weapons control, poverty. Is there anything that Obama has brought to the stage that's been worthwhile?
Well, I think, I mean, again, I do not want to get into the U.S. domestic scene, but the U.S., as you know, is completely, again, unfortunately, polarized right now between Congress and the executive branch, and that's a different, much more civilized polarization, because you have a system working, an independent judiciary, and what have you. But whether he was enabled, to move forward on some of the issues, I mean, that's a question. I mean, you had obviously right now the whole issue of the Obamacare, health care. You have the arms control agreement. He had one with Russia, You have the immigration issue. I mean, these are very much contentious issues. And whether you blame Obama or you blame Congress or you blame both, I mean, that's not for me to decide. But this is obviously, when you have a country that, you have the executive and the legislative branches completely at loggerhead, well, things are not in the best situation. I agree with you.
Question?
Andrew Birtle, I'm a retiree living in Thailand. Is a nuclear war sometime, somewhere inevitable, do you think?
Well, basically, that's why I'm trying to say that we need to rush into nuclear disarmament. If we continue the status quo, I'm afraid to say that I might agree with you. I mean, Rajiv Gandhi, India was pleading, as you remember, for years for a nuclear disarmament, and he had this famous speech, I think, in 1995 at the UN, basically saying, the world, we will go through self-annihilation, and the risk is very real. Well, nobody listened to them, and then India joined the club and became a nuclear weapon state, and that's again is something to ponder. If you try, to move into a certain security system and the world does not listen to you, or the big boys do not listen to you, well, what do? You join the big boys, you become another weapon state, and protect yourself. But then, in increasing the number of the weapon states, as I said, the odds are what you are saying, that someday, somehow, we might see a nuclear weapon, but we might not be able to be alive to write about it.
My name is Antonio Strano. I'm a retired American, and I want to ask you, can you unequivocally state whether Israel has or does not have nuclear capabilities?
Well, I think everybody takes it that Israel has nuclear weapon arsenal.
Yes, everyone takes it, but maybe they don't.
Yeah, I mean, I cannot vouch on it because as during the time of the agency, we do not inspect. Israel is not party to the non-proliferation treaty. They keep this policy of ambiguity, but I assume everybody takes it that they do have it.
Yeah, so I believe they do, as well as probably most people.
Yeah.
What I want to ask you is, why is the question never asked when they talk about Palestine, when they talk about Iran, when Israel makes threats about blowing up Fordo in Iran? The Iranians don't say, well, we're going to blow up your nuclear capabilities. There has never been a nuclear conversation about Israel, and I wonder what's missing, why don't we have this talk?
Well, this is a very deep question you can ask, and all I can tell you that we need to get a genuine peace process going in the Middle East, because I mean, there's a lot of stuff people don't talk about, and that goes back to the double standard I talk about. And you can have some double standard. You can have, say, you are one of us, so it's all right. We are not going to ask you hard questions. On you are not one of us, so we are going to, clip your wings. But these are not solutions. Solutions are, you just have to, as you rightly said, talk to each other, and on the basis of equality. And saying, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and let's have a system that applies to everybody. But that's not happening right now. I agree.
When you were in your UN position, which nuclear powers kept you up at night? Which ones brought you out in a cold sweat? You have North Korea, probably can't deliver. You have India, Pakistan. They've detonated bombs, but they're not capable of military action. You have Europe, with Britain, France, who you would hope would have their weapons under control. You have the US, you'd hope the same for them. You worry about what's going on in Russia at the moment. And then it all comes back, and it's the Middle East. Yeah. And it's Iran, and it's Israel.
Yeah.
Was that the area that got you worried?
I think all of that, all what you mentioned. I mean, again, you don't know where the fault line is going to be, and of course, certain areas you worry that you don't have a good command and control system. In certain areas, when you see the government is not in full control, you worry about, in certain areas when you have a regime that is paranoid, that it could come under attack, like in North Korea, you worry about it. So, but at the end of the day, you worry about every country that operating nuclear weapons. I mean, even in the U.S., you remember the cases of, the nun that went through a nuclear, I think in a nuclear deposit, or the number of aircraft that has been circling, without people noticing, carrying nuclear weapons. So mistakes do happen, in the best systems. So you worry about all of the above, absolutely.
Right, so there was no particular area, it's just it's the big picture.
Well, I think, probably North Korea was one. Of course, when India and Pakistan were on loggerhead, you worry that one of them might be tempted to use. I mean, you worry about when there is a serious conflict. As you mentioned, for example, right now, I mean, Ukraine, of course, nobody is talking about that, but you do not want the conflict to escalate, because these are countries that, I mean, you have NATO and you have Russia, and you do not want to see any escalation that anybody would think of using nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And I don't think, at least hopefully, either NATO or Russia are thinking in that direction. I mean, because they understand the implications of it.
Right, question.
Hi, Dr. ElBaradei. I'm John Fink. I live outside of Washington, D.C. And first, I want to acknowledge the great body of work and your contribution to this.
Thanks.
It's fantastic.
Thanks.
My follow-on question is about North Korea. How does one take what has been characterized as a rogue state and bring it into a nuclear community in a way that is fungible, tangible, and accountable?
Well, the whole idea actually the whole problem starts with this rogue state or axis of evil, or all this stuff which we used to, assign to countries. I mean, it doesn't lead to security. I mean, when you can imagine when you are being labeled axis of evil, that you are not going to put down your arms. And I've been, my experience at least with North Korea, that they're being completely paranoid that the U.S. is after them since the end of the Korean War. Whether that is right or wrong, that's an absolutely obsession they have. And to me, the only way to deal with it is to continue to talk to them, and you continue to build dialogue with them, and to continue to build trust. If you have noticed, when there was a dialogue with North Korea, things were going okay. When the dialogue stops, then they become like, a child was making a temper, So you need, there is no one single linear solution, but I think the only thing that keep trying to hug them, keep trying to give them trust, keep trying to build a dialogue with them, because there is no other option. The more insecure they are, the more dangerous they become, in fact.
I actually just have a very simple question. We're hearing a lot about what, the concerns with different countries, how there's really no progress. I would just like to hear your thoughts on any countries that you think are doing the right thing or making any progress, per se.
Sorry, what did you?
She wants to know, sorry, who are you?
Well, I would just be interested in hearing, because we've heard about how, there hasn't been progress when it comes to America. With nuclear, things are still happening there, Iran. Are there any countries you think are moving forward, or actually, there's some efforts there?
To develop nuclear weaponry?
Yes.
Other than the one we talked about?
Yes. No, not to develop, but not nuclear weapons, but steer away from that.
Countries that are doing the right thing, progressing in a positive direction away from...
When it comes to utilizing nuclear power. Going in the right direction.
With nuclear power?
Yes.
With nuclear energy, you mean?
Yes, energy, sorry.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of countries that are developing nuclear energy and, working with it. I mean, nuclear energy, as you know, after Fukushima and before that in Chernobyl, got a big hit, and still suffering from the Fukushima, and the future, how much nuclear energy will be used as part of the energy mix is still a very much, a good deal of uncertainty, frankly, because it depends how much shale oil you are going to have, how much renewable is going to be, affordable or being able to use as base load, large quantities. It depends on what's the record of safety of nuclear energy for the next 10 years or so. But I think, there is a number of countries. The US, for example, is building 4 new reactors, and these are the first since the 1970s. On the other hand, Germany decided to move away from nuclear energy completely after Fukushima. And France, and that's where I have a house. I live next to power stations, nuclear power station, and they get 78% of their nuclear of their electricity from nuclear energy, and they're quite supportive of nuclear energy. You compare Germany and you compare France. Two neighbors. Have not always been seeing things eye to eye, but they are completely have different views on it. So there are India and China. China in particular is the one, country that is building a lot of nuclear energy right now because they need all the energy they can get. I think right now there's 26 reactors under construction, in fact, or 18 in China. The majority of reactors under construction right now are in China. In fact, India is trying to do the same. And these are countries that completely have no energy. And we have 1.6 billion people who have no access to electricity. You have to understand that. That's and without energy, you can forget any development. When we talk about I think about 2.4 have no modern energy system at all. They're still relying on burning wood and stuff like that. So we have an energy. Energy is still an issue. Gas and coal, of course, is a problem because of climate change. Gas probably is much better. Oil, again, sometimes it becomes very expensive. Sometimes, for economic or political reason, fluctuate in prices. The renewable is a future, but they're still very expensive, and you still are not being able to use it for a larger scale. So nuclear could work as a bridge. In fact, it's a bridge for the next, say, 50 years. On the one hand, it's a clean source of energy. On the other hand, of course, the risk is of a serious accident. That's a major problem with nuclear energy. It's something like Chernobyl, and to a certain extent Fukushima. However, if you look at Fukushima, for example, the number of fatalities are very few, if at all. I think maybe 2 or 4. But people are very sensitive about nuclear because there is a hypersensitivity about nuclear because you don't know the impact on radioactivity. You don't know how it impacts you in the long term. So if you see an explosion in a chemical plant, people are ready to accept that. Or if you see a plane coming down, people are ready to accept that. That's part of the risk of modern life. But anything has to do with nuclear, people react in a very hyper negative way, and we have to understand that. And that's why I always used to say, at least during my time at the IAEA, that safety has to be the number one priority, and it continues to be. All right, I'll take a couple of questions.
All right, can we have quick, short questions, please?
Thank you very much. It's a very simple question. First of all, I'm really thankful to all of you. Well, my question is, India and Pakistan is fully loaded country with the nuclear weapons, and everything is there. Most modern equipment is there. Most modern machineries are there. But public has no food, especially Pakistan is concerned. No food, no light, no drinking water, and we are not safe there, right? I think so. We realize that some superpowers is playing with the role of underdeveloping country. Taliban is there. Das is there.
Okay, can we
and
move?
One second.
Can you ask a question? Because
1 second. So I want your opinion. Thank you very much.
Okay, question, please. Question.
Yes, the next question. My name is Eric Mooney. I'm a retired member of the Foreign Correspondents Club. And my question is, there seems to be an assumption that disarmament is a good thing. But there are people who claim that throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s, peace was maintained through the strategy of assured mutual destruction. And there are people who claim, rather than disarmament, a balance of power is to be desired. Could you comment on that, please?
Sure. All right, these are the two last questions. I think. Okay. On disarmament, again, I mean, the argument is, I mean, people saying that peace was maintained in this, from the Second World War, because of the mutual assured destruction. But it's the same people who maintain that who are now flipping, if you like, and saying, I've realized that there is a proliferation of nuclear weapons, that it used to be 4 or 5 countries, now there are 9, and you can continue to add more probably if it continues. And at that time, the phenomenon of extremism, was not there. And one of the greatest worry right now is that you might have, as I said, an extremist group getting their hand on nuclear weapons. So I think on balance, and I yield to Bill Perry, for example, or, who is one of the advocates right now of nuclear disarmament, and who basically said that as you mentioned, we manage to avoid nuclear war by good luck and not by good management. That's not very reassuring. And he was the Secretary of Defense.
Hi, my name is Yusuf Aboud. I work at UBS. It's an investment bank. A quick question. I want to go back to the nuclear issue, Iran. Do you believe that there is a chance for the Western power to strike a deal with Iran in the next 6 months? And how is it linked to oil prices, especially that the Saudis and the Western powers are pushing oil prices down to, which is going to hurt definitely Iran and other countries? What's the link here? Do you think is going to work and they're going to be pushed into signing a deal over the next 6 months? Thank you.
I'm not sure it has anything to do with the oil prices. I mean, the Iranians have been under sanction for me. The issues at stake are much larger. It has to do with regional security, the role of Iran as a regional power, the relationship between Iran and the rest of the Middle East, the Israeli factor. All these are going to play. I hope it will work. I very much hope that Iran, at this kind of Middle East, what we have, that you would like to have Iran on the right side, on your side, if you like, or whatever side, that all of us should be on the same side, because Iran is a major player in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Palestine, and you would like, Iran deal, and it's not just about the technical issue, as I said, it's about regional security, could help a lot to arrest the deterioration that we are seeing in every aspect in the Middle East. All right. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to wrap it at that. We have a gift for you, a souvenir.
Thanks.
It's a book produced. It's a book that's been produced about the King of Thailand. In many ways, it's a parallel history of Thailand. So if you're depressed about Egypt, you can read about 21 coups since 1932. We're on our 19th constitution, so I think Thailand's a good example of where you have to keep going.